The bell over the door at Ellen's bakery rang soft, and nobody looked up except the man standing near the register. Rachel Sutton set the pink box back on the counter before the young clerk could reach for it. "I need to cancel this," she said, keeping her voice even, though the phone in her coat pocket had not stopped buzzing for the last 10 minutes. The clerk asked if something was wrong with the cake. Nothing was wrong with the cake. Rachel signed the cancellation slip with a hand that would not hold steady, thanked no one in particular, and left before the door finished swinging shut behind her. Sam Reeves set down his coffee and walked to the counter. "This isn't the story it looks like 5 minutes in. Stay through the whole thing before deciding who's really losing something here." Sam didn't know the woman's name. He knew the shape of what he'd just watched, the practiced calm. The way she'd thanked the clerk like the cancellation was routine. The way her hand had trembled anyway. He asked Ellen, the bakery's owner, to put the order back through. Same cake, same name on the ticket, paid in full. He asked her not to mention who'd done it. "She didn't leave an address," Ellen said. "I'll get it to you," Sam told her, and he did. 20 minutes later, copied off the delivery slip the clerk hadn't thrown away yet. Sam's son, Jake, was waiting for him outside on the bench, swinging his legs, still in his soccer cleats. 8 years old and narrating everything. He saw a dog across the street, a boat trailer backing in wrong, a man dropping his keys down a storm drain. Sam listened the way he always did, half his attention on the boy, half of it somewhere else. They drove home to the house on Front Street, the one Sam had been peeling wallpaper out of for the better part of a year, a house that still smelled like sawdust in every room. He'd bought it the month after they moved to Wilmington, cash, no mortgage, and told the one neighbor who asked that he liked working with his hands. That much, at least, was true. What he didn't say was that a house needing this much work had been the point, something with a clear beginning and a clear end. Unlike most of what he'd walked away from in Charlotte, he made dinner while Jake did homework at the kitchen island. Mac and cheese from a box because it was Thursday, and Thursday was mac and cheese, a rule Jake had invented, and Sam had never bothered to break. After Jake went to bed, Sam sat on the back porch with a beer he didn't finish, listening to the river 2 blocks down, and thought about a woman he'd spoken maybe 4 words to in his life, and how long it had been since something outside his own house had held his attention past dinner. Across town, Rachel let herself into a kitchen that looked nothing like a woman in trouble lived there. Granite counters, a calendar on the fridge with her son's whole month color-coded. Ben came thundering down the stairs, asking what was for dinner, and Rachel told him spaghetti, same as always, and did not tell him she'd spent the afternoon on the phone with a bank representative who kept using the word hold like it wasn't a decision anyone had made on purpose. The call had come that morning. Rachel Sutton Trust distribution account, temporarily suspended pending internal review. No further detail offered. She'd asked to speak to someone above the representative and been told someone would call her back. No one had called her back. She'd run the numbers twice at her desk before lunch, and both times they came out the same way. Enough in the operating accounts to keep the company steady, nothing in her own name she could touch without the trust's approval, and a birthday 2 days away that suddenly felt like the one bill she couldn't figure out how to pay. She fed Ben dinner, checked his homework, and sat on the porch steps after he'd gone up to bed, phone in her lap, the account balance app open and useless. At 7:40, a delivery van from Ellen's bakery pulled up outside. The driver set a pink box on the porch, said already paid for, and drove off before Rachel could ask by whom. She opened it under the porch light. Ben's cake, the one she'd canceled that afternoon with her own signature. No card, no name. Rachel stood there a long moment, the box balanced on one hand, the porch light catching the top of it, and for the first time in longer than she could easily remember, she let herself cry without deciding first whether it was allowed. Upstairs, Ben's window was dark. He never knew any of it happened. Not the cancellation, not the phone call, not the tears on the porch. That was the point. 3 days later, Rachel went back to the bakery. She told herself it was to settle the bill, though she knew, walking in, that it had already been paid. Ellen was behind the counter, flour on her forearms, and when Rachel asked carefully, like she wasn't sure she wanted the answer who had reordered the cake, Ellen hesitated only because she wasn't sure it was hers to say. Man comes in most mornings for coffee. Contractor. Works on old houses around here. Sam Reeves. She wiped her hands on her apron. Funny thing about him, I heard he used to run some big investment fund up in Charlotte. Real money. Now he's out here reshingling roofs and fixing porch rails for people half his age, who probably couldn't have afforded him 10 years back. She shrugged, like it was gossip and not a door swinging open. People change, I guess. Lost his wife a couple years back, from what I heard. Moved down here after. Keeps to himself mostly, except for that boy of his. Rachel didn't say anything to that. She thanked Ellen, took the address of a job site 2 blocks over that Ellen offered before she'd even asked, the way small towns hand out information without being asked twice, and walked over with no plan for what she'd say. She found him on a ladder, reframing a window on a house that had clearly been beautiful once and was becoming beautiful again slowly, board by board. Fresh cedar shingles stacked on the lawn, a radio playing low from the cab of his truck, sawdust caught in the morning light like something suspended on purpose. He came down when he saw her standing at the base of the ladder, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You're the one who paid for the cake," Rachel said. "Not a question." "Ellen talks," Sam said. Not quite a confirmation, not quite a denial. Why? He thought about it longer than she expected him to. "Because a birthday shouldn't be the thing that gets canceled," he said finally. "Whatever else is going on." Rachel didn't ask him what he meant by that, and he didn't offer. For a moment, neither of them said anything, and the quiet between them wasn't uncomfortable so much as unfamiliar. 2 strangers, standing in the space where gratitude usually turns into small talk, except neither of them reached for the small talk. A truck rattled by on the street behind her. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice and stopped. He turned to grab a level off the tailgate of his truck, and a business card slid out of the open toolbox and landed face up in the dirt between them. Rachel saw it before he did. Cream cardstock, soft at the corners, a logo she didn't recognize, and a name printed under it in small type. Harbor Bridge Capital. Samuel J. Reeves, founder. Sam picked it up without comment and slid it back into the box. Rachel didn't ask about it, though she wanted to. She thanked him again, said something about Ben loving the cake, and walked back toward her car with a question sitting in her chest the whole way. What does a man who used to run an investment fund want with a hammer and a stack of shingles? She didn't have an answer. She wasn't sure yet that she was owed one, and something about not being owed one made her want it more. Behind her, Sam watched her go, then looked down at the toolbox like it had betrayed him. He hadn't shown that card to anyone in 2 years, hadn't meant to now. He put it at the bottom of the box, under the tape measure, and went back up the ladder, and told himself it didn't matter that she'd seen it. He wasn't entirely convinced by the time he reached the top rung. The following Tuesday, Gary Nolan called an emergency session of the Sutton Maritime Board. 9 seats around the table. Rachel's at the head only because her father had sat there for 30 years before her. Gary stood instead of sitting, the way he always did when he wanted the room to feel like a courtroom. "I want to be clear, this isn't personal," he said, which was usually how Gary opened the sentences that were the most personal. He laid out numbers: a shipment delay back in March, a client account lost to a competitor down in Charleston, a cash position he characterized as concerning without ever saying concerning to whom. He proposed a formal governance review, and during that review, a suspension of the CEO's operational authority, and separately, a freeze on trust disbursements tied to her equity position, until the picture is clearer. Rachel watched 3 board members nod slightly before she'd even finished responding, and she understood in that moment that this had been discussed before this meeting in rooms she hadn't been invited into. She kept her voice level anyway, the way her father had taught her to argue a point she was losing, slower, not louder. She argued the numbers. She argued the timeline. Carla Jennings, sitting 2 seats down with a legal pad she hadn't written a word on, caught Rachel's eye for half a second, something careful and warning in it, and then looked back down at her pad before anyone else noticed. The board didn't vote that day. They scheduled a formal vote for 3 weeks out to allow for a complete review, which Rachel understood meant 3 weeks for Gary to build a case and 3 weeks for her to either find one of her own or lose the company her grandfather had started on a single tugboat lease back in 1951. She sat in her car in the parking garage afterward, for longer than she meant to, at her father's original partnership agreement, a document she kept in her glove box for reasons she couldn't have explained to anyone, open on the passenger seat beside her. Outside, the port worked on the way it always did. cranes moving containers against a sky that didn't care what had just happened 3 floors above it. Across town, Sam's phone rang while he was up on scaffolding. A name he hadn't heard in 2 years. Dean Ashby, who used to handle disclosure filings for Harbor Bridge Capital back when Harbor Bridge Capital still existed as more than a folded-up business card in a toolbox. "Somebody mentioned your name in connection with the Sutton Maritime situation," Dean said. "Thought you'd want to know, people are still asking." "I'm not involved in that," Sam said, and meant it at the time. He climbed back up the ladder and didn't think about it again until that night, lying in bed listening to Jake breathe in the next room, when the name Sutton Maritime surfaced again out of nowhere and refused to go back under. He lay there a long while working out why a company he had no stake in kept circling back to him, and came up with only one honest answer, and didn't much like how simple it was. He got up once, quietly, and stood in the hallway outside Jake's room, listening to him breathe, the way he still did most nights, even though the boy had long since stopped needing it. Whatever he decided to do about Sutton Maritime, it would touch this house too, and Sam had promised himself 2 years ago that nothing from his old life would ever get to do that again. Jake's class put on a spring program the following week, a loose collection of songs and one very earnest recitation about the water cycle, and Jake, without any adult coordination at all, had told his teacher his dad was coming, and Ben had told his own mother the same, and somehow both boys ended up seated 2 rows apart with their parents converging by accident in the gymnasium doorway. "Small town," Sam said, by way of greeting, and Rachel almost laughed for the first time in 3 weeks. They sat together because there weren't many good seats left, not because either of them planned it, and for 40 minutes they watched their sons perform with the particular mix of pride and second-hand embarrassment every parent recognizes. Ben forgot half his line about evaporation and recovered by making up a better one on the spot, and Sam laughed loud enough that Rachel glanced over, and something in the exchange felt easier than either of them had expected coming in. Afterward, in the parking lot, they talked real conversation, longer than either of them had meant it to run, about the house Sam was restoring, about how long Ben had been asking for a dog, about a farmer's market that set up downtown on Saturdays neither of them had been to in months. It stayed light. Neither of them touched anything that resembled the last 3 weeks. Rachel didn't ask what a man restoring porches used to do with an investment fund. Sam didn't ask what, exactly, a woman who worked at the port actually ran. Their hands nearly touched, reaching for the same gymnasium door at the same moment, and both of them pulled back half a second too fast. The kind of overcorrection that says more than contact would have. Neither one mentioned it. Both of them thought about it the rest of the drive home. That night, after Ben was asleep, Rachel sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and searched Harbor Bridge Capital. Most of what came up was dead links and a handful of business journal archives, the kind that get stripped down when a company dissolves quietly rather than collapses loudly. One line from an old Charlotte Business Journal piece stayed with her longer than the rest. Founder Samuel Reeves has stepped back from day-to-day operations following a personal loss. Sources say, with no confirmed timeline for return. She closed the laptop without reading further, some instinct telling her this wasn't information to go digging for from a stranger's obituary-adjacent business coverage. It felt like reading someone's mail, but she didn't stop thinking about it either, and she noticed, brushing her teeth, that she was smiling about the gymnasium door, and not about anything else that had happened that day. Ben came into the bathroom doorway in his pajamas, asking if Jake's dad was going to come to his game on Saturday too, and Rachel said she didn't know, and Ben said he hoped so, because Jake said his dad used to play catcher in high school, and Ben wanted to see if that was true. Rachel told him to go to bed. She lay awake longer than she meant to, turning over a version of the next 3 weeks that had almost nothing to do with the board vote at all. 2 weeks before the scheduled board vote, Gary hosted what he called a community appreciation event down at the Port White tents on the dock. A band, more reporters than the occasion strictly warranted. He'd invited half the investors on Sutton Maritime's cap table and made sure every one of them heard him use the phrase stabilizing leadership at least once, usually with a hand on someone's shoulder. Rachel had to stand up and say something. She hadn't prepared remarks, hadn't been given more than an hour's notice she'd be expected to speak at all, and she felt the whole room measuring her against a story Gary had been writing about her for weeks, without her in the room to object to any of it. She kept it short, thanked the port workers by name where she could remember them, talked about her grandfather's tugboat, the way she always did when she needed the room to remember whose company this actually was, sat back down to applause that felt more like relief than enthusiasm, and caught Gary watching her the whole time with an expression that didn't match his hands, which were clapping along with everyone else's. Sam was 200 yards down the dock, contracted to repair a section of decking that had been rotting since before the event was ever scheduled. Close enough to hear most of it over the sound of his own saw, he watched Gary work the crowd, moving table to table, and something in the back of his memory turned over slowly, like a name trying to surface from underwater. It came to him around sundown, driving Jake home. Gary Nolan, 9 years back, maybe 10, a logistics roll-up out of Savannah that had come across Harbor Bridge Capital's desk, looking for a growth round. Sam had passed on it personally after his diligence team flagged inconsistencies in the receivables ledger that never got fully explained, no matter how many times they asked. The man who'd pitched that deal had a different title then, a different company name on his card, but the same rehearsed warmth, the same habit of saying to be clear right before something wasn't. Sam pulled over on the shoulder of Market Street, engine idling, and called Dean Ashby back. "That name you mentioned," Sam said. "Gary Nolan. I need you to look into something for me quietly." Jake, in the back seat, asked why they'd stop. Sam told him he just needed to make a call, and Jake went back to narrating the boats on the river, and that was the whole of what his son ever knew about any of it. Sam drove the rest of the way home, turning the same thought over. He'd built a quiet life on purpose, on the idea that the version of himself who used to sit across tables from men like Gary Nolan was someone he'd outgrown, someone he didn't need to be anymore for anyone. It had never once occurred to him that the skill wouldn't disappear just because he'd stopped using it. He pulled into the driveway on Front Street, cut the engine, and sat there a moment before going inside, the porch light catching the dust still on his forearms. Dean called back 2 days later with a single line that told Sam everything he needed and nothing he wanted. Same forensic pattern as Savannah. Sam sat with that for a long moment before he called Rachel's office and left a message asking her to call him back. No explanation given, and spent the rest of the evening deciding how much of the truth he was willing to hand a woman he'd known for a matter of weeks. Carla Jennings had not slept well in 11 days, and on the 12th, she stopped fighting it. She met Rachel outside the office, in the parking lot of a diner 2 towns over where nobody from Sutton Maritime would recognize either of their cars, and she brought a folder she'd been carrying in her bag since the week before the board meeting that started all of this. "I should have shown you this a long time ago," Carla said. "I couldn't. There's a confidentiality clause in my contract," Gary drafted himself, "and I have 2 kids and a mortgage, and I told myself that was a good enough reason to stay quiet. It wasn't." Inside the folder, a copy of the trust amendment Gary had cited as grounds for the disbursement freeze, next to a copy of the same document pulled from the trust's own archived records, filed 4 years earlier before a single signature on it had been altered. The comparison wasn't subtle once you knew to look. Rachel's father's signature on the version Gary presented to the board sat 2 millimeters higher than it did on every other document he'd ever signed in his life. The pen pressure slightly too even, slightly too clean, the kind of consistency that comes from software instead of a hand. "He didn't just freeze your money," Carla said quietly. "He forged the reason he was allowed to." Rachel sat in the car for a long time after Carla left, the folder open on her lap, and she cried in a way she hadn't let herself since her father's funeral, not from fear this time, but from the particular grief of realizing a dead man had never intended to leave her powerless, and someone had spent months making it look like he had. She was still sitting there when Sam pulled up to collect Jake from the diner, where both boys had been dropped off for grilled cheese while Carla and Rachel talked 2 tables over. He caught the tail end of it through the open car window enough to understand something had broken loose, not enough to know exactly what. "You don't have to tell me," he said. "I know," Rachel said, "but I think I might need to tell someone who knows how to read a forged signature." Sam was quiet for a second too long. "I might know somebody," he said, and something in his voice told Rachel that whoever he was thinking of, it wasn't a stranger, and for the first time since the toolbox and the business card, she let herself wonder out loud. "Is it you?" she asked. "The somebody." He didn't answer right away, and the not answering was its own kind of answer, and neither of them pushed it further. in a diner parking lot with two 8-year-olds finishing grilled cheese 20 feet away. Carla watched the two of them from her own car. Folder returned to her bag and allowed herself something close to relief for the first time in 11 days. Whatever came next, it wasn't going to be hers to carry alone anymore, and after months of being the only person at Sutton Maritime who knew the whole shape of it, that alone felt like the first full breath she'd taken in a long time. Over the following days, Dean Ashby worked the document the way he used to work fraud cases before he'd left the industry for a quieter life, doing estate law, comparing signature pressure curves, tracing metadata buried in the digital scan Carla had managed to pull before Gary locked the file, cross-referencing dates against a court record from the Savannah deal 9 years earlier, where the same forensic accountant had flagged nearly identical irregularities. By the end of the week, Dean had a report Rachel's own lawyer said would hold up anywhere she needed it to. The board vote Gary had scheduled arrived on time, the way scheduled things do, whether or not the person who scheduled them is ready for what happens at them. 9 board members took their seats. Gary stood again, the way he always did, and began laying out his case for formalizing the suspension of Rachel's authority. He was 3 sentences into it when the conference room door opened, and a man in work boots, still faintly dusted with sawdust from a job he hadn't had time to change out of, walked to the front of the room. "My name is Samuel Reeves," he said. "Some of you may know me as the contractor working on the Whitaker place a few blocks from here. Fewer of you will know that before that, I founded and ran an investment fund called Harbor Bridge Capital, and that 9 years ago, we declined to invest in a company this man," he nodded, once toward Gary, "was raising capital for, because our diligence team found signature and ledger irregularities we couldn't get a satisfactory explanation for. I have a forensic document examiner's report showing the same pattern in the trust amendment Mr. Nolan presented to this board 3 weeks ago." Rachel sat very still in her chair at the head of the table, watching a man she'd shared a gymnasium bench with become, in real time, someone she hadn't fully known she was standing next to. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The room was already turning toward him on its own, the way rooms turn toward anyone who walks in already certain of what they're about to say. One of the older board members, a woman who'd served with Rachel's father for a decade, asked Sam directly why he was choosing to get involved in a company he had no formal connection to. "Because I watched a woman cancel her son's birthday cake because someone made sure she couldn't afford it," Sam said. "And then I watched the same someone stand in a boardroom talking about stabilizing leadership. I don't have a stake in this company. I have an opinion about people who do that to families." Gary's objections came fast and got smaller with each one. He asked who had let this man into a closed session. Nobody answered him. The room asked for the report instead. Dean's findings were passed hand to hand down the table in a silence broken only by pages turning and, once, the low sound of someone exhaling through their teeth. When the vote came, it wasn't close. 8-1, the board moved to remove Gary Nolan from his position pending a full independent investigation, and to immediately restore Rachel's complete authority and trust disbursements, effective that hour. Gary voted against his own removal. No one else did. He gathered his folder and left without looking at anyone, and the room exhaled all at once, the way rooms do when something that had been pressing down on them for weeks finally lets go. Afterward, in the hallway, board members Rachel had known her whole life shook her hand like they were meeting her for the first time, and in a way they were the version of her that had walked in that morning, unsure whether she'd still have a company by lunch, was not quite the same one walking out of it now. Sam stood off to one side near the elevators, not part of the congratulations, waiting to see if she'd want him to be. Gary left the building without speaking to anyone, briefcase in hand, the kind of exit people make when they've already started rehearsing what they'll say about it later to someone else. The week that followed moved fast in the way crises resolve fast once the truth finally has somewhere to land. An independent investigator was retained by the board within 2 days. Gary's access to company systems was suspended by end of day. 2 clients who'd quietly begun exploring other shipping partners called Rachel personally to say they were staying, now that they understood what had actually been happening behind the numbers Gary had been showing them for months. Rachel found Sam in the hallway outside the conference room, still in his work boots, looking like a man who wasn't entirely sure he'd done the right thing walking in there uninvited. "You could have told me," she said. Not angry, just tired and honest. "I know," Why didn't you? Sam leaned against the wall, hands in his pockets. After my wife died, I didn't want Jake growing up around what money does to people when there's enough of it. I didn't leave because I was ashamed of it. I left because I didn't like who I was becoming close to it. He looked at her. I wasn't hiding from you specifically. I was just out of practice being that person. Some days I still am. Rachel didn't say anything for a moment. Then she reached over and took his hand, held it for 3 or 4 seconds, no longer, and let go. Thank you, she said, for the cake. And for this. You'd have gotten there without me, Sam said. Maybe, Rachel said, but I didn't have to do it alone. That's different, even if the ending's the same. Sam studied her for a moment, the kind of look that wasn't measuring her so much as recalculating something about himself. For what it's worth, he said, I wasn't planning on staying involved past today. I figured I'd hand Dean's report over and go back to the Whitaker place and finish that window I never got back to. Are you going to? Rachel asked. Haven't decided yet, Sam said, and something about the honesty of that landed heavier than a firm answer either way would have. They stood there a while longer, neither one filling the silence with anything else. Down the hall, Carla was already fielding calls from 2 reporters and handling both of them without missing a beat, the kind of competence Rachel made a mental note to reward properly once the dust settled. That night, Rachel sat on Ben's bed after his lights were supposed to be off already, and when he asked why she seemed happier than she had in weeks, she told him work had just gotten a lot less complicated. He accepted that the way 8-year-olds accept most things adults tell them, and went to sleep without knowing anything else had ever been wrong at all. The story made the local paper 2 days later, a short business section piece about a governance dispute resolved, and a company moving forward under its founding family's leadership. Sam's name mentioned once, in a single sentence, with no photograph attached. He read it standing at his kitchen counter with coffee going cold beside him, and felt, for the first time in 2 years, that being seen hadn't cost him anything he wasn't willing to spend. 3 floors up, in an office that was fully hers again, Rachel found the pink bakery box, empty now, still sitting on the shelf where she'd put it the night Sam's anonymous cake had shown up on her porch. She hadn't been able to throw it away. She wasn't sure, looking at it now, that she wanted to anymore. Sutton Maritime settled into its new rhythm over the following weeks. The board formalized Carla Jennings into a director-level compliance role, a promotion 3 years overdue that nobody objected to once the reasons became public. Gary's name came off the letterhead, the parking spot, and eventually, after the investigation closed, off the company altogether, the way names do once the people attached to them stop mattering. Jake and Ben kept being friends the way kids keep being friends when nobody makes it complicated. Bikes, a shared obsession with a video game neither set of parents fully understood. Afternoons down at the dock, Sam was slowly rebuilding, watching him work with the specific fascination boys have for power tools they aren't allowed to touch yet. Rachel started finding reasons to be at that dock. A coffee run that happened to pass by. A question about property lines that could easily have been a phone call. A stretch of new decking she claimed to want to see finished, though she came back 3 more times after it was. Sam never asked why she kept showing up, and she never explained it, and both of them seemed to understand that naming it out loud would have ended it somehow, the way naming certain things too early makes them smaller instead of bigger. One evening in early June, she stayed until the light went orange over the Cape Fear River, sitting on an overturned crate near where Sam was finishing up for the day, the boys throwing a football on the grass behind them, their voices carrying and fading with the wind off the water. You ever think about going back? Rachel asked. To what you used to do? Sam considered it, watching the water. Every now and then. Then I watched Jake catch that ball, and I don't think about it very long. He set his hammer down on the crate beside her. What about you? Ever think about walking away from all of it? Every now and then, Rachel said. Then I remember my grandfather leased one tugboat with money he didn't have, and I figure I owe it more than a bad month. Sam picked up the hammer again, turning it over once in his hand without using it. For what it's worth, I don't regret walking into that boardroom. I thought I would. I don't. Good, Rachel said, because I wasn't going to let you take it back even if you did. That pulled a real laugh out of him. The first one she'd heard from him that wasn't half swallowed or aimed at one of the boys, and it stayed with her the whole drive home, longer than she expected a sound like that to last. Rachel didn't say anything else after that, She didn't need to. They sat there until the sun was mostly gone, and the boys got hungry, and nobody said a single word about what either of them was actually feeling, and somehow that said more than if they had. Driving home that night, Ben asked from the back seat if Sam and Jake were going to come to his birthday party, the one the company had insisted on redoing properly now that things had settled. Rachel said she'd ask them. Ben said he hoped they'd say yes, and Rachel, watching the road, realized she was hoping for exactly the same thing, for reasons that had stopped being entirely about her son somewhere along the way. Sutton Maritime threw Ben's birthday party 3 weeks later than it should have happened, and nobody minded the delay once they saw what the company had put together: a full afternoon at the Marina Pavilion, string lights strung between the pilings, a table of food that put the original bakery order to shame, half of Ben's class running around the lawn in the June heat. Ellen came herself to set up the cake, waving off help until Sam showed up anyway and started moving tables without being asked, the two of them working side by side the way people do when neither one needs instructions. Carla arrived with her own 2 kids in tow, already laughing with a colleague near the drinks table. No confidentiality clause left to worry about. Rachel stood near the water with a paper cup of lemonade, watching Sam laugh at something Ellen said, watching Jake and Ben chase each other barefoot across the grass, and she realized, without being able to name exactly when it had happened, that the distance she used to measure between herself and Sam Reeves had quietly closed sometime over the last 2 months. Board vote by board vote, doc visit by doc visit, without either of them ever announcing it out loud. Carla found her near the water and stood beside her a moment, following her line of sight toward the tables. "You know the whole staff has a theory about you two," she said. "I don't want to hear it," Rachel said, though she was smiling when she said it. "Didn't think you would." Carla bumped her shoulder lightly and went to go referee an argument between the boys and a bag of water balloons someone shouldn't have brought. When it came time for the cake, both boys insisted on blowing out the candles together, which nobody had planned for and everybody allowed anyway. Sam came to stand beside Rachel to watch, close enough that his shoulder rested against hers, and neither of them moved away from it this time. "Good cake," Sam said, low enough that only she could hear it. "You'd know," Rachel said. Jake wandered over with frosting on his chin and asked if he and Ben could ride in the golf cart the marina staff used to move equipment, and Sam told him to ask the dockmaster first, and Jake ran off already asking, before Sam finished the sentence. Ellen caught Rachel's eye from across the pavilion, and smiled the particular smile of someone who'd watched the whole thing unfold from a bakery counter weeks earlier, and wasn't the least bit surprised by where it had ended up. Neither Sam nor Rachel said anything else. They didn't need to. The first cake he'd ever bought had been for a boy he'd never met, paid for and delivered without his name attached to any part of it. This one, he helped carry to the table himself, in daylight, in front of everyone, for a family that had somehow, without either of them deciding it on purpose, become his own.